Hello and welcome to another session of Miss Thomas Learning from Home. Today we're going to have a look at the railroads in an 18-mark question. This focuses on the section of the USA module from 1860 all the way through to 1877 on the white expansionism across the plains. So let's look at the question. The railroads had the greatest impact on the Great Plains in the years 1861 to 77. How far do you agree? Worth 18 marks. So to start your planning of this question, you need to bug your question. So first of all, you're going to box the command words. So your command words are how far, which to me means balance. So you need to agree and then disagree, which is our second command word. I've underlined the key words. First of all, the railroad, the greatest impact, and then the Great Plains and these years. Do not be mistaken. There are several places in the textbook and in the course where we look at the plains. For example, during the 1838 movement of westwards, we look at the plains there. Just really be careful on those dates because the exam board do catch you out. And then go back and look at the question again. So, railroads. Did they have the greatest impact on the Great Plains? I've abbreviated to GP. In 1861 to 77, I need a balanced argument. So that kind of concludes our planning of reading the question. I'm now going to plan our responses. So for an 18-mark question, you need 4 PEE paragraphs. Once you've given your 4 PEE paragraphs, you are then going to give a conclusion of whether you agree or disagree with the question. So, only if you are looking for the top grades will you give a 4P and a conclusion. Until then, you're just adding paragraphs to go up the grades boundaries. So, I have given here 4 reasons which I've planned with my class previously. So, we said yes, the railroads did have the greatest impact on the plains because they cut through the plains. Our second reason we agree with the question is the railroads allowed to the movement of cows and people through the plains, which had a great impact. So, for example, the fact that the ranchers drove their cattle up from Texas up into the northern parts of the plains to sell them on the railroad and sell them eastwards to get rid of their excess stock. However, I'm going to disagree with the question. So here I've got the homesteaders. I've brought in something the question hasn't actually mentioned. Okay, so I'm bringing in extra contextual knowledge to the examiner and showing that I have a really secure understanding of the course. So homesteaders, this has a great impact on the Great Plains because homesteaders were given huge quantities of land to farm for 5 years. If they were successful in farming that land, then they were able to keep it. That's going to have a great impact on how the Great Plains actually look. Also, the fact that the homesteaders use barbed wire. That means that the Great Plains are no longer great. They're sectioned off into smaller sections, allowing for that nomadic nature of the Native Americans who live originally, indigenously on the Great Plains. That no longer is viable. And finally, to bring in a final point of view and a bit of knowledge to the examiner, I've talked about the cattle ranchers. So again, kind of repeating and bringing in this element, but saying that cattle ranchers were a great impact because they drove their cattle through the plains. So that's my PEE paragraphs plan. I would highly recommend you do a for and against little table, and then you could just put your reasons. You don't need to put your explanation in if you were wanting to save time. So I'm going to come over to this section here. So we are now going to have a look at a PEE paragraph. So I've done an example for you. I have lifted the question and turned it into a statement. So the railroad had the greatest impact on the plains in 1861 to 1877. So all of the key words that I've underlined, I have formulated into my point of argument. I'm then going to describe it as my evidence. I'm going to give my contextual knowledge to the examiner. So in 1860, President Lincoln commissioned the Railroad Act, allowing for a transcontinental link across the continent. So it's just telling the examiner I know what the railroad is. I've used a good example of the railroad. I've said who was president. I've also used the keyword transcontinental, so I'm kind of showing off a little bit. But this bit is the important bit, your explanation. Most of you do this naturally, but this is the bit that you often fall short on. So, your explanation. This impacted the Great Plains because I've lifted the keywords again. This impacted the Great Plains because, really important, that word because signals to the examiner that you are explaining. So this impacted the Great Plains because it allowed people to easily migrate and settle across the America, changing the landscape of the Great Plains with homesteaders and ranchers now inhabiting this area. Now, this is a very basic explanation. What I would suggest you go and do is when you see this impact, you can talk about positive and negative impact. So there may be some elements of this part of the course that are positive, and you want to talk about how this positively impacted the Great Plains. I hope that helps everyone, and I will see you soon with another video. All the best.